One of the biggest business stories in the last few years has been the relentless rise of weight loss drugs. The widespread availability of treatments like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro, which have the effect of helping previously obese people shed astonishing amounts of weight, has produced a rush of demand from those seeking a supposed miracle cure. This has propelled revenues at Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, the two pharma giants behind these drugs. Last year, the pair earned a combined $90 billion in revenue from these glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonists, also known as GLP-1s. By 2031, analysts project that the figure will be $150 billion, making these the best-selling prescription drugs ever made. But the rise of weight loss drugs is much more than just a business story. It has opened a window on sweeping changes in public health over the past decade, in the efforts of the food and drink industry to boost consumption, and into social attitudes about what constitutes a healthy lifestyle. The increase in obesity and the prospect of a treatment which can reverse it has unearthed deep moral questions about how much responsibility people should have for their own health, and to what extent governments should subsidize such remedies. So this week on The Big View, we're going to talk about weight loss drugs. It's what we do at Reuters Breaking Views. We tap our best sources around the world for fresh insights into the biggest questions in business, finance, and economics. I'm your host, Peter Thalassen. This week's guest is someone who is very well known to Breaking Views readers. Amy Donlan is an associate editor of Breaking Views and co-host of Viewsroom, our weekly sister podcast. But in addition to her day job, she has spent the past few years researching and writing a book about the rise of weight loss drugs. It's called Off the Scales, the inside story of Ozempic and the race to cure obesity. And having watched Amy beavering away at this book over the past few years, it's very exciting to get a chance to read it and to talk to her about it. Amy Donlan, welcome to The Big View.
Oh, very nice to be here.
So Amy, you spent a couple of years really intensely researching and writing about this topic. But I'm just curious, when did you first hear the word Ozempic?
So I really have to think about that one, because I think it was during the pandemic, and your predecessor, Rob Cox, asked me to write an article about virus vices. Do you remember this idea that during the pandemic, everyone's in lockdown, everyone's smoking and drinking and watching pornography and doing all the things that basically will apparently ruin their health. And so he asked me to write, and it was very easy to find all this data to support the fact that people were doing this, because the sales of the companies we followed, like the British American Tobacco and all they were all going up. But then I remember Rob saying, what is the end result of this? So if everyone is really living an unhealthy life, what happens then? And then we decided that obviously diabetes would go up, certainly if people were putting on a lot of weight. And then obviously Novo Nordisk, which makes Ozempic, was the stock to look at. And we had this great graphic in the piece showing all of the vice stocks, we'll call them, going up, but actually Novo Nordisk completely outdoing all of them in terms of how well it was doing. And that was the Ozempic effect. That was this diabetes drug that came out in 2018. So the pandemic was 2020. So it was 2 years later that I first started to kind of realize, I was like, oh, this drug is doing really well. And the reason it's doing so well is because it's so effective at treating diabetes. That was my thought at the time. So it was, about 5 years ago.
Okay, well, it's been a long and wonderful journey since then. I mean, there are so many interesting things to talk about in this topic. I mean, the whole sort of the battle between the pharma companies, the social aspects of weight loss and taking drugs for weight loss, the economic effects, and so on. But you've done a lot of digging into the origins of these drugs. So maybe just start by explaining, if you can briefly, how do they work?
So the origins of these drugs date back to like the 1980s, where you had a kind of crack team of scientists in Mass General that were trying to come up with better ways of treating diabetes. And
Mass General is what is?
Massachusetts General Hospital, which is in Boston. And it's like one of the top research centers kind of in the world, basically. So it attracts these brilliant minds. And meanwhile, in Denmark, in the University of Copenhagen, there was another scientist, Jens Jules Holst, who was also looking at hormones. They were all looking at hormones, and they figured hormones were going to be really critical to helping treat diabetes in a more effective way. And they came across GLP-1, which they sort of knew it existed. They knew that there was something in the stomach that dealt with satiety, like I said, basically feeling full. They knew that there was probably a hormone, but they didn't know how it worked. And so they set about trying to figure out, proving, first of all, its existence, and then showing how it worked. And it turned out GLP-1 to be kind of a magical hormone when they realized what it did. And it was they did this test in Mass General where they essentially showed that blood sugar, when basically if you're diabetic, your blood sugar goes up very high, and that's obviously problematic for your health. So you need to bring that down, and insulin brings it down, but insulin brings it down like a sledgehammer. And so you can end up with basically going into hypoglycemic shock and into a coma. So this drug worked like a thermostat. It brought your blood sugar down to just the right level. And by doing that, it was just so much better. They could see that. The weight loss benefits of it came later because they didn't think it was as important. Obesity wasn't a big issue in the 1980s in the US or anywhere else. But as they started doing more and more testing on it in the 90s, and this is when we're moved to Novo Nordisk, they started realizing that there was actually a weight loss element to it as well. But not everyone thought that was interesting. So the weight loss, just for the drugs that we have today, so Ozempic and Mounjaro, which is Eli Lilly's drug, what they do is you take this drug, an injection once a week, and it basically makes you feel fuller for longer. So a doctor recently said to me, it's like basically people who are overweight act like skinny people. So they feel fuller after a very small amount of food. They're not interested in food in the same way. And then there's one interesting element that we still don't know fully exactly how this works. But when you take this injection, it travels up your vagus nerve into your brain. And this is where people are seeing the effects of like addiction. Their addictions are basically going away. So people are stopping smoking, they're stopping drinking, and they all think that's to do with the dopamine center of the brain being interrupted by these drugs. So that's why they are so revolutionary, because they do so many things.
Yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating. And the fact that these side effects are sort of are becoming apparent, and yet nobody can quite explain why they're doing that or how they're working is really extraordinary. But I just to come back to the sort of the weight loss thing. I mean, it seems to me from reading the book actually that, as you say, the sort of the weight loss effect of this diabetes treatment was pretty clear early on. And I think, I mean, you sort of say there were some people who were working on it who kind of realized the significance of that, but it took a long time to sort of get to the point where actually they thought about that as a separate drug. What was the reason for that?
So I think that it comes down to sort of the stigma, I would say, of obesity, which is now really considered a disease by most top health organizations in the world, but it wasn't seen that way in the past. And again, I think it's important to think about where Novo Nordisk is from. Like, the country of its origin is Denmark. And Denmark, as you have origins in Denmark yourself, Peter, I have been to Denmark
many centuries ago.
Many centuries ago. But when you go to Denmark, it is, even today, even with obesity absolutely everywhere, it's a very healthy country. People are very active. They're very outdoorsy. They eat well. Obesity is still a problem there. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's not to the same extent that you see in the US. So what these two scientists were finding, there was Lotte Bjerre Knudsen and Mads Krogsgaard Thomsen, who basically, they were essentially saying there is a link between these two things. So you don't get type 2 diabetes without obesity. And if we can treat obesity with this weight loss drug, this would be brilliant for everybody. It would be a healthcare revolution, and it would boost our sales. And at the time, they were really kind of struggling with sales at the time and innovation. So, yes, so they basically kept telling their bosses this, and their bosses kept coming back saying, these people need to eat less and they need to move more. And there's this scene in the book where basically these two executives are sitting around saying, I run 10K a day, I cycle 60 kilometers a day, and that's why I'm not fat. And there was a real battle internally in the company between the scientists saying, that is not right, that is not correct, what you're saying is not based in science. And actually, these people have mainly like dating back to like the Ice Age, we are kind of predestined to hold on to weight. That's the mechanism of our bodies, is to hold as much weight as we can, and for your body to think that it's dying if it's losing weight. So it does not know what the right BMI is. It just knows that it gets to a certain weight and it needs to cling to that weight as much as possible to keep you alive. So that was essentially the battle.
Yeah, no, and we can get back to the sort of some of the broader sort of social debates there. But so Breaking Views, we love numbers. So I mean, can we just put some figures around this? I mean, like, how big is the market for these diabetes drugs and obesity drugs? How big do you think it's going to become? And how does that compare? Can you sort of put it in some context? How does it compare to other sort of pharmaceutical blockbusters?
Yeah. So basically last year, we'll go with the last year, for the two drug companies, which is Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. So they made about $90 billion of sales between the two of them. And the vast majority of that would have been what they call their GLP-1 franchises. So Eli Lilly has an oncology business, a neurology business, but mainly this is its big selling. This is what's growing its sales faster than anything else. Novo Nordisk is almost entirely diabetes and obesity now. A lot of analysts seem to think that we're 2025 now. By 2031, so 6 years' time, the market will be $150 billion in sales. So that is incredible. A year. That's an annual figure, yes. The other drug, there's a drug that Merck made, a cancer drug called Keytruda. Now, bear in mind, cancer affects 1 in 2 people in most markets. So that drug is a very ineffective drug. That was about $25 billion of sales. So the numbers are pretty incredible to think about just how big this market is. And it's because, again, these are just like World Health Organization estimates. Around 1 billion people in the world are living with obesity. And there's an awful lot more people who are overweight. So there's a huge, huge market for these drugs.
Yeah, so that's orders of magnitude bigger than anything we've seen before, really. Yeah. So one thing, we can maybe get back a bit to sort of the competition and patents and where that leads. But one thing that really struck me from reading the book is the power of sort of celebrity endorsements in getting particularly Ozempic to take off. Right, you describe Dr. Mehmet Oz, who's the TV doctor in the US who now runs Medicare in the Trump administration, sort of flagging this treatment. And it also seems to me more broadly, it's sort of this it's like the first big sort of mass market drug of the online of the Instagram era, the TikTok era, right? So people are talking about it. They're making spoof videos based on the advertising jingle. There's also an element of online life where people are more aware of their, are paying attention to their appearance and maybe more interested in being thin. I just wonder, compared to sort of how drugs have sort of caught on in the past, how would you sort of compare that to this period?
I don't think there's ever been anything like this, but I think it all comes back to the disease that this is treating. As you mentioned, there is an actual disease, and then there is also people who just want to lose weight, who just feel like they have 20 pounds extra weight and they want to lose that. And I think a lot of the social media hype and buzz is to do with the people who just want to lose that bit of weight, and it really kind of caught people's attention. And it was really a word of mouth. It was really word of mouth that kind of catapulted Ozempic to where it is in terms of that kind of social, or this zeitgeist moment, because it was celebrities who were talking to their doctors about this, hearing about this weight loss drug, hearing about a diabetes drug that actually had these weight loss benefits. And they knew the commercial was out. It was out in 2018. And for people in America, you will know the Ozempic that probably went around your head. But so that was sort of out there. They knew that there was weight loss benefits, so they were going to their doctors. I
thought you were going to start singing there for a minute, but Okay.
I don't think anyone needs to hear that. But so that was essentially that's how it got huge. And then you're right, on social media, people then were doing things like talking about Oz face, which is this affectation you get when you lose a lot of weight. You lose a lot of weight around your face and you get kind of hollow cheeks, and that was caused Oz face. Kids in school were talking about that. There's Oz butt. There were these surprise Ozempic babies, because one of the really interesting things about Ozempic is it delays the emptying of your stomach. So if you're taking the contraceptive pill, that doesn't absorb as well. So lots of women were getting pregnant unexpectedly, not knowing that their birth control wasn't really working.
So, but then, I mean, you mentioned earlier the sort of the discussion within Novo Nordisk in Denmark about, do people, should we really be marketing a weight loss drug to people, or is it just a sort of lifestyle choice? And as you say, okay, so the accepted or sort of the widespread view now seems to be, well, this is a disease and it needs to be treated. But there are sort of bigger questions about this, right? I mean, I guess this idea that people can sort of, that they can live an unhealthy lifestyle and then take a drug to absolve them of the effects of that unhealthy lifestyle. I just wonder, sort of having explored this and researched this, where do you stand on that whole debate? To what extent do you think that there still needs to be some sense of personal responsibility?
So I think what I would say is, I think that the world we live in is a very unhealthy world in terms of we're living more sedentary lives. The food industry is making food that is really unhealthy for us. Their bodies don't really know how to process. I think the personal responsibility argument, I think that if anything, by writing this book, to me, that was completely shut down by speaking to the people who were taking the drugs and listening to their lives, basically, and their life experiences. And when they first started realizing that they were overweight, that weight was a problem in society, being bigger, not even obese, just being bigger was a problem. So it typically happens around 7 or 8 when people realize that they're in bigger bodies. They live alongside often siblings who don't have weight issues. So there's not necessarily a genetic, an obvious genetic marker that they can look at. And I think that when you talk to the people who then take these drugs and then they work, it is incredible. It's like just a switch for them and something has just, I don't know, their lives have just massively improved. And also, I suppose, the personal responsibility argument, I've said this to many people when they ask me, if you think these people that are living with obesity have not tried dieting, like, you're out of your mind. They've tried every diet you could think of under the sun. Everyone I spoke to had tried their first diet. Many were put on Weight Watchers by their parents when they were like 10 and 11. So it's not that they haven't tried to lose weight. Some of them have lost 50 pounds at a time, and always going back to this idea of the body and how the body works. They just claw it back on, and their brain is in overdrive while they're dieting, telling them, what about that Snickers bar? What about that, McDonald's? What about this? Food, the entire time they're dieting. And then they ultimately, the diet ends, they kind of give up, and they feel so, feel like failures. And this drug has made them feel like actually this was a disease that could be treated. And I think the personal responsibility argument, I don't really buy. And I think if people want to discuss that, then they need to talk about the food industry. They need to talk about the choices that are available to people.
So just related to that, talk a bit about the food industry, because obviously, I mean, one of the knock-on effects is that people eat less and possibly drink less, maybe smoke less as well. And you keep hearing these stories about, kind of restaurants, in sort of upscale restaurants, where in areas where a lot of people are taking Ozempic, and the sort of the amount of food people are ordering has just collapsed. People are coming in and sharing like 2 little starters, and then that's it, or something like that. So how does that sort of that effect ripple out, and how does the food industry respond to that?
So I think it's interesting. I think the food industry is in quite a tricky spot with these drugs, if I'm honest, because what one of them have said to me, like one executive in a very large food company said to me, we can't sell salads. Like, we can't do that. That's not our model. We can't sell fresh food to you. We can't sell you a piece of salmon and make a margin on that. Like, that is not what we do. So what they're trying to do is like Nestle, for example, has sort of launched this entire GLP-1 portfolio, which includes things like protein, because if you're on these drugs, you tend to lose a lot of muscle mass, so you need protein. Um, I mean, to some extent, they're like restaurants and things are offering, as you said, much smaller portions. McDonald's, we've yet to see much from because, and I think the issue for them is they've already tried the salad model and it did not work. So I think what my view on the food industry and how they adapt to this is these drugs are still quite expensive and they're still out of reach for a lot of people, which means that there's actually a very significant majority of people who are still eating the same unhealthy foods that they were always eating, and just to keep going with that for as long as possible. Because I think they can't, I mean, I was listening on to Associated British Foods, which has a number of kind of sugary items that it sells. They own Primark in the UK, and their CEO said that they expected in Europe anyway, food volumes to fall like basically 2%, like at least 1% to 2%. So that's like the pie that they're all sharing is much smaller. And if a lot of people go on these drugs, they are not going to want the kind of food that they sell. So I think, again, this is just my personal view. I think these companies they will probably get smaller because there isn't really an obvious shift for them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It does also it plays into that sort of that question of the sort of social stratification, and which ultimately comes down to cost. I mean, these are at the moment these are patented drugs. They're not cheap, and so people who can afford them will pay for them. Some some health insurance will cover them, some of them won't. Socialized healthcare organizations are quite restricted in terms of what they provide. So you end up slightly in this situation where Hollywood celebrities who are already quite skinny by anybody's standards are sort of taking Ozempic, and people who actually might really benefit, like some of those examples you gave earlier, maybe don't have access to that drug. So is that going to be an ongoing problem, or how do you think that plays out?
I think for now, that is definitely what we're seeing. And I think that the stigma that I talked about will get worse for the people who are in the unfortunate camp, where I think it tends to be that people in the lower socioeconomic classes tend to struggle more with obesity. And that's probably because of the food, again, that's available to them. So I think that, yes, I think that, there's been so many jokes at the Oscars and the Emmys about, oh, it's the year of Ozempic. And they look out, it's basically the joke is a host looks out at an audience full of insanely skinny celebrities and is like, they're all on Ozempic. So I think that
and they all have diabetes. Who knew? Yeah.
Diabetes is really taking off. So I think that's for now, but that's not always going to be the case. And I think that 2031 is the year that semaglutide, which is the active ingredient in Ozempic and Wegovy, Novo Nordisk's drugs, comes off patent. And what we see when drugs come off patent is the price collapses, and generic drug makers are already gearing up for that moment. There's a company called Sandoz, which is preparing to do that in Canada in the next year. So I think that they will be plentiful. There's lots of other companies moving in, trying to provide their own versions. The actual price, this has really surprised me. The price of the drugs, Ozempic and Mounjaro, are actually coming down because Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are fighting each other out on pricing, which you don't normally see with a duopoly like this. They normally try and protect prices, but they're really aggressively going for share, which is bringing prices down. But I just think it's not bringing prices down enough. I mean, still $500 a month, $200 a month, that's still a lot of money if you're really cash strapped.
So how do you see that? It's just, I mean, obviously we spend a lot of time breaking news writing about these companies and the impact of this on their finances. How do you see that evolving? I mean, Novo Nordisk has had in recent months, has not been doing well financially, right? It's had some disappointing sales numbers and so forth. How should we think about that market and and I guess what it does to the bottom lines of these companies, which you would think would be absolutely coining it?
Yes, I mean they are. I mean they are still coining it. They're still doing phenomenally in terms of sales and growth, like much better than their competitors. But they are being valued. Novo Nordisk is now being valued like one of the top tier pharma companies, rather than this like obesity giant that's going to be the leader in this market. Eli Lilly's valuation has come down too, but it's still many multiples ahead of other people. I think that Eli Lilly has more time. They have a longer patent, so they have more time to make more money. Their drug seems to be better. There's fewer side effects. Gastric side effects are the big issue. So more weight loss, fewer side effects. Eli Lilly will probably stand to do quite well. And Eli Lilly has other, as I said, it's mainly making diabetes drugs, but it does have other businesses. It does have oncology. It does have these other areas where it can really kind of start to focus on. Novo Nordisk is really in a different spot. Their entire business, almost entirely, they have a rare disease business, which is very, very small. This is what they do. And the problem is the more effective these drugs are, the less likely they are to make money because the price will come down, more entrants will come in, and their drug comes off patent. And unless they can come up with a drug in the next 5 years that has no side effects, very good weight loss, and they can sell that and people favor that, I think that, yeah, you're going to see them. And I think that's what the market is kind of pricing in now is a very different story for them. They were recently enough like the biggest company in Europe by market value, and they've basically halved.
Yeah, so you have this weird kind of dichotomy where the market for these drugs keeps getting bigger and more people keep using them and sales keep growing, but the companies themselves are under pressure. I mean, the one option is obviously to develop new types of drugs which do this better. I mean, there is also a lot of discussion about delivery mechanisms, right? I mean,
yes,
at the moment you have to inject.
Yeah.
People are talking about pills. What's going to happen there?
So, yes, I think last year, I went to this Obesity Week conference in Texas. So this was where every obesity specialist, the
glamour of it is just
the glamour of it
kind of
in San Antonio, Texas. But it was fascinating to listen to what people were getting really excited about. And I think pills were what people thought, even once daily. I think they seemed to think that was better than a once weekly shot. And the reason for that is the shot or an injection or jab or however you want to call it. First of all, they have to be refrigerated. So that's just a kind of a hassle for people. You have to bring them with you and they're cumbersome and you have to bring all these injections. Let's say you're going on a big business trip for a month. You have to bring these injections with you. And people don't like taking injections. There's a lot of people who still fear needles. But people have become very accustomed to taking supplements every day. So taking a vitamin every day. So the idea that you just wash it down with your coffee, this tablet is better for the drug manufacturers too, because they're cheaper to make. Tablets are much cheaper to make than injections. But the problem is Eli Lilly had this very promising tablet version of its weight loss drug. And in the most recent trial, the weight loss benefits just weren't strong enough and they weren't matching up to the injection. And I guess maybe the way it may play out is the people who may want to lose 10 pounds, maybe they go on the tablet. That could be there could be different types of markets. The people who really are trying to lose an awful lot of weight because they're living with obesity, they may use the jab because it means that they lose 25% body weight. But there is still actually room for a lot of other entrants, because if you look at the data, about 50% of people come off these drugs after a year. And that's for a number of reasons. That's cost. That's it could be just they don't like how they feel on the drugs. It's side effects. So that market is still to play for. That is still a huge amount of people who, if they could stay on the drugs, and people do need to stay on the drugs to keep the effects going. That is essentially, I think, what these drug makers need to do, is try and figure out a way of appealing to more people and reducing the side effects.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine. I mean, you said it's interesting that people come off it, but you can sort of. It's hard to imagine that in a world where this stuff works, that people won't get used to sort of just keeping on going if they can, right?
Yeah,
If there's a way of doing it. One thing I'm curious about, just maybe just to finish up, is on the sort of broader health questions. I mean, one of the perennial complaints about the sort of big pharma companies and health systems in general is that they're very focused on treating things, right? Sort of you have a specific illness, here's a drug that solves that deals with your illness, and much less focused on broader, preventative health, on things that you can do that would stop you from becoming ill in the first place. And and I guess one thing you could argue with the obesity drugs is that what the benefits are that people are less likely to develop other problems, heart disease, strokes, etc. How is that? Is that sort of thinking feeding through into the discussions around adoption of these drugs, or are we still slightly in a world where sort of it's sort of, here's this problem, we'll treat this problem, and we'll think about the costs of that, rather than thinking about the broader benefits, the social benefits?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think the answer is no. I don't think governments are thinking about these drugs in terms of, because I think if they were, you're right, they would be funding the daylights out of these drugs. Because if you think about how expensive cancer, dialysis, heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, like these are the things that really cost a huge amount of money in terms of how long people are in care for, how long they're in hospital for. So if you could prevent those ailments from ever coming about, and actually even from a society point of view, if you think about people living longer, healthier lives, they're more likely to work. They're more likely to be productive parts of society. And many countries are dealing with aging populations. So this is, yes, if you were being pragmatic as a government, if you had more money, which none of them do, but if you had a lot of money, this is what you would invest in. I think, yes, you would be thinking about this from prevention. Because there was a really interesting thing that happened very early on in me looking at this whole market, was when Novo Nordisk came out with a study, and it said that if you were taking these drugs, you were much less likely to need dialysis. And there is a company that makes dialysis kits, which is called Fresenius, and billions of euro was wiped off their share price in a single day because people thought, oh, there'll be fewer obese people, they won't need dialysis, and therefore this is what's going to happen. So I mean, it's clear that the benefits of this are available, but I think that most governments just don't have the money to be thinking about prevention. But I think you're right; it's something like 10% in America of the healthcare budget is spent on prevention, which is ridiculous.
Which is very small. Amy, we could talk about this at great length, and we will do, I'm sure, in future, and I'm sure you will be doing so in the coming weeks ahead. But thanks so much for taking the time to talk this through. It's a really, really fascinating dive into this topic.
Thanks, Bear.
That's our show this week. Thanks to Amy for that conversation, and as always, thanks to you for tuning in. This podcast was produced by Oliver Taslich in London. You can listen to a new episode of The Big View every Tuesday. Don't forget to listen to Amy and Jonathan Guilford on our sister show, Viewsroom, every Thursday, as well as the other great podcasts from the Reuters team. To get in touch with feedback, questions, and ideas, please email us on breakingviews-podcasts@tr.com. That's breakingviews-podcasts@tr.com. If you like what you heard, please rate the show and leave us a review, and check out our views on the biggest stories in business and finance every day at breakingviews.com and reuters.com.